Okay, so let's start talking about how do we use these Hydra delegates that we install and configure. Okay, so if you use Houdini, you might have a layout like this. So this is the default Houdini layout, and you can see I have a few things here happening, but this is not what we're gonna be using. So to use Solaris, you need to go to the Solaris desktop, and there's several ways to do that. You can just switch your context anywhere for just going to the stage context here, and you can see all of these panels change to reflect that. The easier way, I think, is just go to the Solaris pre-built desktop here. You can see I have one that I made, but there is a Solaris desktop, and you can see you have a few new panels here. This one, the scene graph, is going to be really important. Of course, the viewport is going to be really important, which is where we actually use the Hydra delegates. There's a lot of information here from USD. Everything you're doing here in Solaris is going to be working with USD. So there's a lot of information about the primitives, the layers, etc. And then you have your network view here, or your stage view here, stage network here, and the parameters here. I like to have a better area or a larger area for editing my network, so that's why I just edit this desktop to have this. I also like to have this viewport a little bit smaller because I have a 4K monitor, and then rendering that image or that viewport at that size it's a little bit taxing. So I want to have a smaller area to render and a bigger area to work with my nodes here, which is the way I like it. You're welcome to work as you like, but I encourage you to just start using the Solaris desktop so you can actually take advantage of everything here. So I'm gonna switch to my desktop. So I also just minimize the shelf just to have some more space. I can even do that for the bottom panel there. All right, so the Hydra delegates are here in this stage viewport here under the views here. Basically, this as I mentioned, this GL view that we have by default, it's already a Hydra delegate. It's just the OpenGL delegate. It's a renderer, and it's rendering here in OpenGL using your graphics card, right? So I just had this simpler scene here to show you around here, and of course you can change here between the different delegates we have here. The viewport, it's using Hydra all the time, so we are always using Hydra here. It's the viewport is a little bit different than SOPs. You can see there we don't have all the options we have in SOPs here. This viewport has less options because we're not going to be editing geometry here, and this is not a scene view. This is the Hydra view, I mean the stage view. So there's less things we're going to do because we're not going to be editing geometry here directly. We can inside a SOP network, but not here. So that in that case, the viewport will change to reflect that. So here, again, we can set this to different views, but the most important part is that you can switch between the different delegates here. You can see right now I deleted my last just to show you how we are going to be adding those as well. We're going to be doing more about lighting in later videos, but I wanted something to show you the common settings that we have here. So right now we're using Karma, sorry. So I switched to Storm there, which you can see it's not a great video review there. We can switch to Renderman here, or and then we are at this moment we're rendering with Renderman. All this viewport, whatever delegate you're using here, it's rendering with that render specifically. So we change to Arnold. We are now using Arnold, so you need to have your all the licenses and stuff set up for all this, right? As well for Redshift, so you change that. Also, you can see here in the viewport, there's options that pop up for different renderers. You can see if I mouse over here, this is enable progressive rendering. This is for enable denoising. This is for optics denoising, the freeze tessellation, etc. Also, these Hydra delegates have options because that's maybe the one the first thing you want to know is like, how do I change my settings of the renderer? Okay, right? So let's go here to, let's use RenderMan. And here in the viewport, you have this little eye, which is the display properties, which are also available in the scene view. All right, so if we press D all through the viewport, which is what I like to do, you can also just click here. You will see the properties here. The first tab, it's now there's a new tab here, which is called Render. And these are all the display properties for the viewport. As default, they are still there, but the first one is where we have our render settings for the viewport. And you can see this is the integrator for RenderMan. This is exactly the RenderMan settings. And not exactly everything is here. Some stuff it's in other places, but the integrator part is here. You can switch here the integrator to whatever. You can see I can change to occlusion, you can change to the BCM, change to the unified, etc. Right? Or the visualizers, which is maybe could be another way to use like an OpenGL kind of render here. Even something like flag colors, etc. This is just RenderMan stuff that comes with RenderMan. If you want to see the wireframe or not, etc. But yeah, and this is gonna be the same for all the other renderers. You can see I'm gonna leave this open. If I go here and change this, for example, Karma, you can see Karma has its own properties here. You can disable lighting to also have like this kind of display, OpenGL fast display here. You can enable the noising, the pixel samples, etc. That you wanna change here. Let me just change this maybe to something lower. You can see this is gonna render faster. The render percentage is here. See, it's just doing 16 pixel samples, which should be a lot faster, and it's gonna render finish fast, finish at a faster rate here. So yeah, this is all the properties for the renders are located in this part here, because that's the first thing that you are gonna be looking for. Like, where are my properties? Because by default, the defaults might be a little bit too heavy. And you can see Arnold, switch to Arnold, and this is the Arnold properties are here. If you want to change to Redshift, again, it's gonna have the properties here. Okay, so there's not a lot of properties here for Redshift, but I will show you where the rest of this are. You can switch this to maybe less samples, and you can see that this is gonna render much faster, and it's gonna finish. I mean, it's gonna be noisier, but it's gonna finish faster. When not when you're working on the viewport, not all the time you want to have this super finish resolution. You just are shading and you're seeing something fast, and that's what you want. So yeah, that's where the render settings are. So okay, so I just switched to Karma and lowered the samples there to render faster. I'm using 8 samples just to render this quickly, and you can see it's useful, pretty useful to just see what's happening. So one of the other thing is you're gonna start wanting to say, well, I want to add lights, right? And if you are aware of using different renderers like I am, you will say, well, okay, I'm gonna use I'm gonna use Karma, I'm gonna use a default light, or if I'm on Arnold, for example, which you can see Arnold is pretty dark. I want an Arnold dome light. Well, things work differently in Solaris. In Solaris, we have generics basically, and the generic and the lights have a generic representation, which it's what all the other renderers use, and this is the power of Hydra. So Hydra is basically a translator, and it creates this kind of common layer for all renderers. So if a render needs a light, you just press a light, and Hydra communicates to the renderer, and the renderer creates the specific light it needs. So in that way, you don't have to worry about that part. All right, so let's create a light. Also, if you see me using this little widget here, it's a tool that I created for creating nodes. It's exactly the same as pressing tab. It's nothing specific to Solaris. But if you see me using that, it's just that. It's the same thing. If I say create a light, it's the same thing. So let's create a light here, and you can see the light is just generic light. Again, if I search for light, there's no like Arnold light, etc. Even here in the tab menu, you can see there's no specific sections for the renderers. It's just like there are some specific stuff, like RenderMan has some nodes for that. Karma has a few nodes, but for example, if we go to lights, there's no Arno light, renderman light, etc. It's just lights and dome light. That's all there is, and that's how Hydra communicates to the renderer what it needs. So if we create a dome light here, and we have a light and dome light, also the other thing is, which is different from the other contexts in Houdini, is that these things have to be connected to the network. Like if you have them like that floating there, they do nothing really. They are just nodes without any calculation. So for them to have an effect on the scene, we need to have them connected to the scene. We'll see how in the next lesson how I structure all this hierarchy of the scene. But for now, we can just plug in. Let's plug this. You can plug it anywhere that you are. Actually, for example, I can just put it there, and the light now you can see is now affecting the scene. I can go here and see where my light is. It's down over here, and we can just move it up like that. I'm not seeing light. Sorry, I just turn that on, and this light right now you can see it's I think it's a point light by default, but which is not great. So I can see I have my display flag here, so the light is connected before, so it's actually available in my scene. So if I click here, you can see this is not available because my scene is not evaluating this light yet. So if I click on this light now, this is taken into account. So here in the properties, you can see the properties are basically the basics of any node. And then have the base properties. Well, this is the transform, has the base properties, shaping, shadow, etc. And then we have specific settings if we need those for the lights. Let's change this to a rectangle, which is what I like to use most of the time. Let's just turn this down, which is basically an area light. Now we have an area light there at the top. Again, this light can be changed to the different things, a distant light, a different shape, a disk, a geometry light. Well, I need to change, select the geometry. And then these base properties will just update to show me what I need specifically for that light. You can see this has the width and the height for the area light, etc. Just make a really thin light there, like this. So yeah, we have the color, etc. And this is gonna affect all the other renders. Let me just make a cool light like that. And if I change to OpenGL, of course, it's gonna be affecting here. If I switch to the lighting view, which seems not to be changing there. If we go to RenderMan, you can see RenderMan is gonna have now a blue light. Again, as I said, we don't need to specify a specific light for RenderMan. Just Hydra takes that and says, okay, you can just create this area light here. You can see Arnold is now using that, and Redshift is going to be exactly the same. If we want to set up, you can see Redshift by default has this light enable or visible, which might or might not be what is expected there. So let's switch back to Karma, and let's say now we want to have a dome light, and this dome light we can again need to plug it into the network here, and we have to show it as well, or just show something below that right on the network. You can see now we're illuminating with the dome light here. The dome light could be anywhere in the scene, of course. If you wouldn't want to see the representation of lights here, you can toggle them off here. If you don't want to see geometry, if you don't want to see the cameras, etc. Or if you don't want to see the highlight of the selection there. So there is our scene again back in Karma. Again, the dome light is exactly the same way. It has its own translate part here or section, and then we have the base properties for the intensity, the exposure, etc. Don't blow it up. For the color, if you want to change it, and then for a dome light, the thing is that you're gonna want to change a lot is the texture, right? Let me just change this to an HDR image. Let me turn this light. You can change this light to just disable it, that will disable the light for affecting the scene. And you can see now we have we are illuminating here with an HDR image here, and we're using Karma. Again, if we switch to renderman's gonna use the same. If we switch to Arnold, it's doing the same, and if we switch to Redshift, it's gonna be doing the same. So this unified world or setup goes through everything in Solaris, and that's how this is actually very powerful stuff. So your setups could work with most renderers there, with not a lot of modification really. So let's switch back to Karma really quickly here. And also these settings, these things that this common nodes have, is they have specific settings for the specific renderers. You can see Renderman has specific things that it needs to set. Redshift has specific things that it needs to set. Karma also has its own set, and Arnold has its own set of things, right? For example, Arnold has in area lights have, let me enable this area light, has this spread or angle spread property here. If we need to set that, we can actually. That's not something that is specific to, for example, Renderman or Redshift or even Karma. So that's actually something really specific to Arnold. So that setting, you can actually set it there. Let's disable this light here, and let's make this light white again. Set this to white. And here in Arnold, if you want to set that parameter specifically, let's go to Arnold first. If you need to set that parameter specifically for that, you need to, you can see everything is kind of disabled. And this column here on the left is telling you what it's doing. It's basically saying, do we need to modify this property? And it says, no, do nothing right now. And we can just change it here. This is going to be also really important because USD has this concept of overriding or modifying value. So that's why you're going to see a lot of this. So this is why you're going to see this properties here all over the place in Houdini, which is not common in subs, for example. It's just you will see this, for example, if you have worked in dynamics, but here in Solaris it's all over the place. So if we want to set this property, we set this to set or create, and then we can modify it. You can see if I lower the spread, you can see the light is kind of closing in, and that's what it does, kind of focuses the light. The light is pretty stretched here, so it's illuminating a lot. But if you want to have like a little square of light like that, you can do it pretty quickly in Arnold like this. It's a good way to do sometimes like a spotlight or something like that if you need to have specific area of light like that. But again, this is going to be specific to Arnold, because if we change to Karma is just not going to use that, right? Because it's really specific to it. The same thing happens with render settings. For example, if we want to set some specific render settings for the final image, you can see we have a render settings node, and let's put it down here. And you can see this node has specific settings here, just the basics. The camera you're gonna render, the resolution, and then basically that's it. But we have the specific renderer settings here. You can see this is the Arnold renderer settings are all here. The Renderman settings, and the Redshift settings, and the Karma settings are all here. So the ones that I show you before here are for the viewport, but for the final image, you should always set your render settings with a node like this. You can also see this is not affecting at all here, because again, it's just loose here in the network. If I connect it, for example, here under this camera, now that's gonna be available. And the way you can tell that is actually available is here. You can actually set it selected here. You can see render settings here. It's not available right now because, of course, I have the display flag here. I need to put my display flag here. And then you can see now I can say use the default render settings or use this one. So if you have several render settings, you can select them from here. Okay, so this is the default because it's the only one in the scene. If you be careful with that, because if you are setting render settings, for example, let's go to for example RenderMan, and you already have render settings in your network, and you say, well, I want to change this to the occlusion integrator, and then you say, well, this is not working. What the hell is going on? This is not working. Well, the thing that happens here is that as soon as you have render settings, it's just taking over. So make sure, if you want to keep using that, either disable this, or you can see now this is not enabled, and if I change this to occlusion, now it's gonna work, right? So, or just use this guy to actually control your settings. If you want to go to RenderMan and you want to change the integrator, you can change it here. I mean, I know there is a little bit of might be confusing, but if you just play with it, you get used to it, and it's really just simple. If you just want to disable this is really actually really flexible, because you imagine you can have all the render settings for different looks or different setups. If you want to render a preview, a really low res preview, and then you have another one for your final settings, you can do that with different nodes, and let's just be a matter of just maybe switching, making a switch and switching between those and go. All right, the final thing I'm gonna talk about a little bit here is scene organization, and this is really important in Solaris here. You can see we have this area here. Let me just select this. You can see we have all this setup here. Let me collapse everything here. This is basically like if the outliner or of your scene. So this is, I organize this. You can organize this the way it works for you. Encourage you to have a method, and maybe on your studio you already have a way to organize all this stuff. But it's really important to have a layout that you are going to be using all the time. So for example, here I have a scene which just contains everything. For example, these lights that I just created are not inside the scene. They should be, but it's the scene, the lights that we just created here manually. I have a section for geom, which is just geometry on the scene, and you can see each one of these components has inside the mesh they actually represent, and then the materials are inside of them. You can see this collect has the material there. I choose to do it like this because I want to have this. If I want to move this object to another scene, whatever, I can just move it and it brings its own materials with it. We will talk again more about this in the next lesson. And the cameras, you can see the cameras have its own section here, and the lights have, right now they are on the roof. They should be on their scene, and the way we can do that is just, if I go to this light, I can see here there is a path. Primitive path is called. It's not the same as the primitives in Houdini. This is like another kind of primitive. And you can just say /scene, and basically that is gonna place these scenes under scenes light. And OS just means the name of the node, and you can see now these lights are now placed inside the scene there, which is just, it's just done. It's just that simple. It's not that complicated. And again, as you can see, you can put this anywhere you want in your scene. You can organize this as you like. Okay, so now that being said, let's move on to the next scene where we're gonna start shading our objects in Solaris.